All right. What's up, guys? I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me. I'm just trying out the sound here. Let me know if the sound's okay. The mic is kind of far away from me. I don't know what we're going to do about the mic placement. I am waiting on my guest to show up. I mean, we totally could have done this over Zoom, but it's okay. It's actually kind of cool if you do it in person. Oh, and there she is, showing up now. Cool. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Blackbird News, where everything is connected and the viewers are smarter than the average bear. And good afternoon, or good evening, people, wherever you are. And this is the volume is really low. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. I don't know. We're going to have to just get it cranking. How's that? Is that a little better? We'll see. We're going to get right on the, oh, yeah. Yeah, probably easier. But welcome everybody. And yeah, so this is the new, so it's better now? Okay. This is a new time. We'll see how this works out. It's kind of like the hottest part of the day, but I have the door open to the studio right now. The one whole wall is open, and we got a fan going, so hopefully it's not that hot yet. It's not that hot yet. We are not in the dog days of summer. We're in the early cooking days of spring. Yeah, but barking pups always nice to have as part of the soundtrack. But anyways, greetings. We're live on YouTube, Rockfin, and on Twitter, and we're gonna get into it. My dog is also very spastic when greeted by guests. She loves the guests. Super excited. Extra excited. Anyways, yeah. Thought we'd do something a little bit different today. Change it up. And have a conversation. We were actually talking about, there's a chair here for you, Cassandra. What's up? We were having a conversation yesterday about something that I thought would be appropriate for the show. So, and you guys got it in the title. But anyways, welcome everyone, Cassandra.
Hey, how's it going?
I think I can hear you, so you're good on that. This is extra loud.
Okay.
Right. But anyways, we're having a conversation about overpopulation and kind of the reality of it, you know. So the reality that we've gone from 1 billion people to 8 billion people in 100 years. But anyways,
Yeah. Greetings,
yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, we were talking about this. What was it? Yesterday, day before yesterday,
Yeah.
and we were actually. So do you mind?
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it. Yeah. Take
So
it away.
first of all, I'm Cassandra, Faye Floyd, also known as the daughter of the Fates. And yeah, we were talking, I guess it was Sunday, about this thing that a lot of people are talking about right now, especially on TikTok, the 4B movement happening in South Korea. And for those of you who are not familiar with this movement, Cliff's Notes version is that in the year 2016, based on a book that was published. I don't know the name of the book. It was a Korean book. But it was a story about this woman who, was frustrated with life as a Korean woman in South Korea. And some women read the book and they were like, oh my God, this is my life. And they decided to, based on contents of the book, make this social pledge that unless they could, get their government to address the issues that they were suffering from in the society, that they would make this pact with each other to the reason they're calling it the 4Bs is it's no heterosexual marriage, no heterosexual sex, no babies with men, and no babies, no dating, no sex, no marriage. And all of those things in Korean start with the letter B. So they called it the 4B movement. Anyway, I was talking about the fact that this past year in 2023, South Korea officially became the country with the lowest birth rate at 0.78 babies per woman in South Korea. And some people are saying that the movement is responsible for this rapid decline in South Korea's birth rate. Some people are contesting it. But Americans who have been discussing, the 4B movement, I have found are perpetually coming to the wrong conclusion. And the reason I say that is I've heard several content creators talk about, women in South Korea have decided that they would rather go extinct. They would rather the human race go extinct than have babies. Horrible oversimplification and misinterpretation of what the movement is about. But okay. We hear on a regular basis any number of government officials and billionaires talk about the crisis of the lowering birth rate. The birth rate has been lowering in developed countries all over the planet, right? And it got me thinking about politically what has happened in society in the last 100 years since we went from 1 billion people at the turn of the century, the turn of the 1900s, to 8 billion people as of December 2022. And I feel like there's a lot that this is such a huge issue, and it's one of these issues that nobody is really talking about, to me, in a way, because people talk about overpopulation and its impact on the environment. People talk about overpopulation. And that's the other thing. Just a few years ago, all these same billionaires were talking about overpopulation. Just 5-10 years ago? Ted
Turner famously, Bill Gates famously.
Yep.
But now Elon Musk is like, we must have more babies. We must.
Just a hot second ago.
Yeah.
And there is a very insidious and political and economic motive behind how these conversations swing from one extreme to the other. And so there's a book that I read on my YouTube channel, the first book that I read on my YouTube channel, called The Great Cosmic Mother, rediscovering the religion of the earth. And in one of the later chapters, the chapter is called "The Machine." And now the book was written in 1987. So in 1987, she is talking about the great abortion debate that was unfolding in 1987. Now, it's happening now, but back then, this was when all of these guys were like bombing abortion clinic. They were like really radicalized. They were bombing abortion clinics. They were actually killing abortion doctors, right? And this is the period that she's talking about. She said, but we can't have a clear understanding of the real essence of the abortion, the pro-life, pro-choice debate without looking at the historical context and how that looks, especially in what we call the third world. And she talked about how these narratives that are put forward in the general society are orchestrated by local governments and by corporations that determine their bottom line needs based on what is happening with their bottom line at the time. So she talked about like Mattel Corporation and how in Singapore, Mattel Corporation was actually trying to shift women from procreation to sterilization, and was actually giving employment incentives to women who would voluntarily submit to sterilization to get these jobs, right? And how whatever the bottom line needs for corporations were at that time would determine the narrative within the general population about, oh my God, we need to have more babies, or oh my God, we have to stop having babies. Right. And how governments would become complicit, actually, fully participatory, using religious ideology to contribute to these campaigns. So with the 4B movement, there was one young man who was talking about the history of this in South Korea, how South Korea's population has swung from one extreme to the other since the 1950s, and how the government has been responsible for initiating these swings depending upon what was happening economically in the society. But it always became like a moral question. It's presented to the people, it's presented to the masses as a moral question, but it's always about the economic bottom line. Do we need more cheap labor, so we have to get these women to have more babies, or are there too many people using the resources that we have? Now we got to pump the brakes. And let me say, one example that he used in talking about the history of South Korea's participation in the swinging extremes in the birth rate was, he said that in the 1950s, on average, women were having 4 to 6 babies in South Korea. And the government was like, this is problematic. We need these women to stop having babies. They started initiating propaganda campaigns to win people, like music and like culture, to win people away from having babies. Well, because the culture is still very patriarchal, the babies that were valued were male babies. And so to participate in, one, incentivizing people to have less babies, and two, to make sure that males were the dominating babies that maintained, the government was actually paying. This was in the 1970s. The government, 70s and 80s, the government was actually paying for women to abort their female babies. So if they, through ultrasound, discovered that they were having a female child, the government would pay for the abortions.
Interesting. So I want to ask you, okay, it's funny how searches change. So like, I just searched this yesterday and it said the government was paying. Now it's saying companies are paying. Like it changed in one day from now it's corporations are paying. What? Like, yeah. I don't know. I think like the population discussion is kind of like the immigration discussion, which is just, it's used as like a hot button issue to divide people and to make people upset and to get people all like, we need less babies. No, we need more babies. No, right. And get people all like, but there's a real, the real issue underneath it. There's always like, the real machinations of like, so like, the immigration issue is stupid, right? Like the way they present it is so dumb, right? Because like Republicans always say like less immigration, and Democrats are always like, no, treat them fairly. But they both allow, like both parties end up allowing people to just come across the border. basically for cheap labor, basically
Right.
to undermine unions, and and we live in a society that's having a lower birth, the birth rate is going down. So our population is growing only because of immigration, and they actually like that. They need that because of the economics of it, right? If you actually have a country that is losing its population, eventually you're going to lose your consumer base, and right, everything goes down because the consumer base goes down. So it's interesting that now population is such a dividing issue, because a few years ago when I would talk about population, people on the left would be like, that's, if you're talking about population, it's racist. And people on the right were like, if you're talking about population, you're anti-human. You're you hate humans. You're like Bill Gates. You're like the World Economic Forum. But the thing is that, like, both sides don't like the population discussion. But the reality is that if the population goes down, the economy goes down, and nobody really has a plan for that, right? Like, it wouldn't be such a bad thing, right, if the population went down, if the economy like turned into a steady state economy, and or if there was less GDP, right? If we based our happiness and our prosperity and our wealth and everything on something other than growth, right? A growth economy, right? So, but nobody has a plan for that. So, like, I just think the population discussion is, interesting, because I don't think the reality of what, the real reality of like what a lower population or a higher population means for the planet and for people is really discussed. Like, nobody ever really wants to discuss the reality.
Nobody wants to discuss it because, again, in my personal estimation, I think that we've become so dependent on the luxuries the seeming luxuries that have been presented to us through corporations, right?
Right.
That the idea of living in a world where we didn't have quote access to these conveniences eludes us, right?
Right.
And it plays a direct role in my estimation to the population question. I'm gonna tell you why. There's 8 billion people on the planet now. In 1900, there were 1 million people, okay? Those 1 million people, and their estimates said it took anywhere from 25,000 to 15,000 years of consistent human life to get to this 1 billion people, right? And in 100 years, we have 8 billion people.
Right.
In 100 years, 7 billion people. And there's a documentary that talks about, like, our ability to produce surplus in food is what gave rise to the population explosion. Regardless,
and the thing that gave rise to that ability was oil, it's fossil fuels. But anyways, continue.
So the question for me is who in the world? There's two questions. Who in the world has benefited the most from this population explosion? And second part of that question is, would corporations exist without there being this explosion of the population of the planet? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
And
definitely.
so the idea, I heard this content creator today talk about, like, why don't we just cripple every corporation? And then the counter to that was like, well, where will people have jobs, right? Like,
Right.
where will people
What
work?
about the jobs?
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just a really wicked and insidious, disempowering way that the argument is presented to us. It's a distraction, if you have me tell it. Because even with 8 billion people on the planet, so there are all these studies now that are talking about if we started going back to, like, circular economies, where instead of corporations, groups of people will come together in townships and small towns, and then they will create these circular economies. There will be farmers, there will be people that produce food, and you don't really get food outside of this community that you live in. That doing that will actually allow everybody on Earth to live well. If we could recreate circular economies, right, that everybody would be able to live, and not only live, but actually live well. without corporations. And so nobody's presenting these arguments because it is the corporations that thrive off of and that are pushing this narrative of we need more babies because there is a dollar sign attached to the head of every human born on earth. And if we're not benefiting from that dollar sign, someone else is.
Right.
If we're not benefiting from our birth, if we're not benefiting, like,
yeah, they're literally like feeding off of our energy.
Absolutely.
Right? And our energy creates dollars. Those dollars create, wealth. Blah, blah, blah.
And so when you're talking about population, when you're talking about, for example, the places that are still, the greatest population, the greatest birth rate is in Africa. That Africa is predicted by 2050 to have the greatest population explosion. Well, population explosion is relative considering the fact that consistently since since forever, but particularly since, what was it? What is it called? I can't even think of it. But anyway, since the colonial period, since the 1800s,
right?
But more expressly, since the 1900s, we can point to these corporations that have had these relationships with colonial powers that dominate Africa and the loss of life that has come as a consequence. Firestone is the one that stands out. When King Leopold was still the ruling colonial power, Belgium was still the ruling colonial power of the Democratic Republic of Congo at the time. There, in that short period, when King Leopold entered into this contract with Firestone tires here in the United States, that resulted in the death of 10 million black people in less than 7 years. So yeah, okay, Africa might be having a population explosion, but consistently, enormous amounts of life has been lost on the continent.
And where do people still die from famine? More
not
so
just
than
famine, not
more
just
so
famine.
than any. Yeah.
When we're looking, famine is
genocide
orchestrated.
Right.
Proxy wars are orchestrations of colonial powers that benefit from not having to pay from material resources that they are chronically stealing from the continent. And then black bodies become the extraordinarily virtually free labor that helps facilitate this extraction, and that's all they're there for. So even as these people are talking about the population explosion of black people in Africa, right, they're not saying what they should be saying, right? That at the end of the day, that population is cheap labor and free labor for the continued maintenance of these corporations. That's all they exist for.
Absolutely. And it's wild. I mean, you were telling me or you hit me to the idea of a slavery footprint, which I wasn't really thinking about before, right? And there's lots of different forms of slavery, right? But there is there's a ton of slavery in the world still, right? There's, not just in Africa, but like,
everywhere
in the Far East. And there, there's fishing boats, fishing slaves, right? Like, I forget which country it is, but like in the Far East, right? They'll just capture people, right? They'll offer people a job. Hey, come on the boat. It's paying this much. Once they get on the boat, they're like, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
You're like, you're never leaving, and you're working for free.
Or so, what about the
and we may throw you overboard when we're done with you.
The Uyghurs in China. I just did a whole show on this company. What is it? Shein. It's like when you go on Facebook and you see all of these freaking ads for like Temu and Shein, these super cheap, online stores that you can go to. I mean, super cheap. You can buy a whole outfit for like $3 or whatever. Well, Shein, this woman just did this expose on Shein, and the guy that owns Shein's not even 30 years old yet, and he is the second richest billionaire in China.
Yeah.
And they were talking about what has contributed to the creation of his wealth. One of the things is like these cheap products that he makes, he exclusively uses Uyghur labor. So in China, the Uyghurs are actual slaves. Scores of thousands of them working in 2024 and on cotton plantations. Mm-hmm. Cotton plantations.
Okay.
Cotton plantation slavery.
Yeah.
In the year 2024. Yeah. So we hear the word slavery, we automatically default to chattel slavery in the antebellum South, right? And we envision black people in cotton fields, but here it is,
Well, and let's include, human trafficking, right? There's
So
all the slave, and that's huge. I was telling you, I think I sent you that video. Did you watch it?
Which video?
The guy. I haven't really talked about it on this channel because it's a little rough, but about the guy that was born into a satanic sex cult. But anyways, I mean, he was basically a slave. He was born into slavery, 30 years ago, and in the middle of in New York, in the middle of Manhattan, he was born into slavery, and shipped to a place in Mexico where he was basically a breeder with a bunch of other kids who were slaves, right? Like there is just human trafficking, right? So, and that's a huge business still going on. And everybody is like, oh my God, I'm convinced that one of the purposes of QAnon and or like Trump really did it like a service to the CIA and to, people who are trying to run the narrative that if you are anti respectability, narrative, right? Whatever's respectable to talk about. If you're anti the narrative and if you're anti the ruling elite, and if you're trying to say that the ruling elite is involved in trafficking and or doing anything like that, you're a nut, you're a crazy, you're a QAnon, you're a Trumper, you're a MAGA, you're a conspiracy theorist, but it's absolutely real and absolutely true, and so
well,
all of that is just to steer everybody away from it,
Well, even before, the QAnon, years before the QAnon thing, all of this stuff, right? I did a radio show for about 6 years called Colonialism is Bad for Your Health. And I remember I was in my first year of medical school at the time, and we were supposed to, for our term assignment, go to the Bodies exhibit. Do you remember the Bodies exhibit? It was huge for a while. Like, there were estimates of 55 million people having seen the Bodies experiment. It was so anyway, what it was they were taking these bodies that they had used this new plasticization process to preserve the bodies, but they would pose the bodies in all these crazy, positions, like playing soccer or, playing cards or whatever. But these were actual bodies. And so anyway, we were told in medical school that we had to go see the Bodies exhibit. I was like, absolutely not.
Okay.
That is not something
is
that I will be doing. So the professor was like, well, write a paper why you're opposed to the Bodies exhibit. And so I had to start doing research. Intuitively, I was opposed, but I went ahead and did the research. It took me less than 10 minutes to find this woman who was this outspoken, opponent of the Bodies exhibit, because all of these bodies were coming from China. The guy who perfected this art, if you will, this science of plasticizing bodies was German, but all of the bodies that were used in the exhibit were Chinese, and supposedly these were Jane and John Doe's, all of these different things supposedly that gave rise to these bodies being legal to use in this exhibit. Long and the short of it was, this woman, I interviewed her, and she talked about how 90% of the people that were used in the Bodies experiments were political opponents of the Chinese government. They were prisoners whose organs had been harvested before the bodies were being donated to the scientific process, right? And so even that becomes, so whether you're talking about human trafficking or political, the enormous number of political prisoners that exist on the planet, America having the highest population of political prisoners, right? Again, at the role that it plays in population, in my estimation, is to do what slavery has always sought to do, is to benefit the extraordinary minority at the expense of the many. The rest of us become either cannon fodder for the state. We become the police, we become the armies, we become the military or whatever. We become security forces that quell rebellion in these areas that otherwise would be rebelling. Like if you're talking about, the work conditions in Asia or in Africa or in any of these other so-called third world countries, how do you keep masses and masses and masses of human beings from creating unions or rebelling against these corporations or sabotaging these systems that facilitate relatively easy extraction of resources? You have to have, these little what do they call them? The coup organizations. These little so-called rebels. They give them names like rebels to keep us off square. But these are security forces that are primarily there to ensure that the people do not rebel against their conditions, their working conditions, their living conditions, as these corporations, you want to call them corporations now, it's still the same old bourgeoisie, are still extracting these resources out of these places, and the people don't have any recourse.
So, I mean, are you saying like these are like the Proud Boys or like the Antifa?
Not even. It's not even that deep.
Yeah.
It's not like, who needs a conspiracy theory when the world is what the fuck it is? I mean, excuse my French, but who needs a conspiracy theory when the world is what it is? You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to recognize. All you have to do is watch the daily news to see the FBI estimates that there are over 881,000 people working for free or next to free in this country every year. That's almost 1 million people. Right. So you don't need conspiracy theories, not to discredit them or anything like that, but you don't even have to go that deep to see the direct relationship between the most poor, the most impoverished, the most powerless, and how it directly benefits those who own and control the means of production. Now, I'm not a socialist, so I don't want anybody up on here dragging me for being a socialist, but this is real life.
What's so funny about socialism? Come on.
Well, not to get into another discussion, but so, for example, when we were stuck in this quagmire called COVID, right? Or pandemic.
Those lazy, hazy days of COVID.
But one of the many articles that I read about one of the side effects of COVID was this massive transfer of wealth. Well, do you think that it's a coincidence that the exact, almost to the damn dime, amount of wealth that we collectively lost as the majority of people on the planet directly corresponds to the amount of wealth garnered by the top 10 billionaires in this country? Is that like an accident? You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that this was a very real way of exploiting fear to do what they always do every 10 years or so, is to radically transfer wealth that we have accumulated, that we have worked to generate and build, into their pockets and into their bottom line.
It was basically a recession. It was like creating a recession, but not having to call it a recession. They just called it something else, right? But they were just like, let's take down the economy and like push everybody out of a job. We'll give people, we'll print a bunch of money. This time we'll give people money, right? Because the Great Recession,
we'll pacify them.
2008, they gave all the banks money, and everybody was like, "Hey, hey, we're the ones that like don't have homes anymore, and don't have any food anymore, and don't have jobs anymore." So this time they were like, "All right, we'll give you guys some money," but like most of the money went to the banks, most of the money went to the wealthy, most of the money went to the hospitals, right? And the corporations that ran the hospitals,
pharmaceutical companies, the whole nine, right?
The whole thing. Dang, I had something on my mind and I completely lost it. Where did it go? Oh, this is what Osama on Rockfin actually brought up something that I was thinking about, which is, what about the robot takeover? So that is the one thing, that is a game, right? And they're really trying for this very hard, right? So that's the one thing that I think that might. So I don't think there's a concern about overpopulation or population in general so much as I think that they just don't care, right? Like the people in charge, like they don't care who lives or dies or how you live, right? Because there'll be more people, right? People are always going to create more people, right? In order to do the things that they need to do, create the wealth and do, whatever, trim your trees or mow your lawn or, serve your food or so. Once they get all the robot armies together, which they're doing like as quickly as possible, right? There's somewhere, I say this all the time, but in the Midwest or in China, there's huge warehouses where they're building thousands of little robot dogs and robot humans a day, right? And they're trying to get like millions of them together so that one day they can just be like, you'll wake up in the morning, you will look out your window, and there'll be like 10 robot dogs sitting in front of your house talking about, stay in your house until further notified, right? Like, do not come out, right? Do not come. And they'll use some excuse for it, but like eventually you're going to not be able to like move around because there's going to be a robot dog on the corner of every block, and you're screwed. You're screwed then, right? We are screwed at that point, right? And at that point, maybe they don't need people to procreate because I don't know.
Oh well, so the whole AI thing, the whole robotic thing, I have a different view of what the potential is for this.
Give it to us. Give it to us.
I did a show a few months ago, and it was really more about how we have been conditioned for at least the last 120 years. Like this, this new stream of technology, television, movies,
Right.
have really served a purpose to condition human beings to accept that any future is one to be feared, right? And the first movie about robots, in this dystopian future was the movie, oh my God, Metropolis in 1914, something like that, so around there, 1914. And ever since then, we keep having all of these movies. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, there have been 2,739 dystopian movies created about all the ways that the world in the future is going to be terrible. 2,379. Okay?
Yeah.
What purpose does this serve? Okay, so now I'm a spiritual person. You know what I'm saying? I'm a minister. And so these are the things that I'm talking about. Like, is this for me, it represents this line that is still very religious. Most major religions, especially the Abrahamic religions, are extremely opposed to evolution. Why would these religious institutions be opposed to evolution? To the possibility, or even just the scientific narrative, that evolution is the planet Earth's method of self-correcting, right? Of self-correcting,
Yeah.
which implies something better on the other side, Now we have these religious doctrines that teach us to fear the future, that any change in the future is to be feared, is to be apprehensive about. Now,
And the end is always apocalyptic, right?
Always.
Even
And so,
in the Bible, right? It's
so
apocalyptic.
yes. And so that's my point. When we're talking about AI, one of the biggest themes, one of the most terrifying movies we ever saw about the possibility of the world ending was Terminator in the 1980s, and at the turn of the century, The Matrix, right? That if robots somehow outsmart us, grow a consciousness, their default is going to be to murk all the humans, right? So for me, if we know that the state is owned and controlled by those who rule, that's Abrahamic religions, corporations, and aristocracy.
Right.
That's the wicked trident that governs us all, right? And so if that's the case, then yes, it would make sense that they would constantly be making movies, constantly imprinting on our consciousness that the future is something that we must fear.
Right.
And then they create the conditions that ensure this fear, our fear of the future. I do not believe that AI is something to be feared. I do not. As a matter of fact, I believe that what we should be focusing on is the change of hands of the means of production. I know this sounds very much like socialist ideology.
Bring on some socialism.
I know. But what I am talking about is there's I can't remember this guy's name, but his YouTube channel is called Astrology Report. He does this brilliant 3,000 year layout of these astrological events that are really predominant right now. Short version is he talks about the need of regular lay people paying attention to astrology because it allows us, if we take history into account, the echoes that have the potential to be repeated if we do not use astrology to analyze our past. And so the primary thing that he focused on in this one report was the echoes in history, specifically as they relate to technology. And depending upon who was ruling at the time that the technology was created, or that there was a technological move forward for the whole group, depending upon who was in positions of power would determine whether that technology was beneficial to the whole or whether it was detrimental to the whole. He talked about, and so that is about the balance of power energetically, it's about which way is the pendulum going to swing. So he talked about the printing press in Europe. And he said, here is the first, the Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages. We're right on the precipice of the Renaissance. Here comes the printing press, which has the potential to catapult us forward into this Renaissance. But instead, what it did, because of who was in positions of power at the time, the first book ever printed by the printing press in Europe was not the Bible. It was a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, which called the Witch's Hammer, which taught regular everyday men how to spot, identify, interrogate, and murder witches. Quote, regular everyday women. That was the very first book, and it set off a trajectory of 500 years of Inquisition. The Inquisition didn't happen in the Dark Ages. The Inquisition began during the Renaissance.
Right.
So he talked about this being one identifier. He goes on to talk about this same period that we're in right now. That one of the other earlier technological advances was when Europeans, the Spaniards, I believe, went to China for the first time and discovered how they were using gunpowder. And in 6,000 years of China, it had always been used in a celebratory fashion.
Right.
This period of time that is similar to the one that we are living in now astrologically, this was the period where the Spaniards stole the gunpowder, and it was the first time in human history that this technology had been used in death rituals, if you will, in warfare, right?
Well,
and at the turn of the century, the two big ones that he mentioned was cinematography. The first films produced, right? The first time we used radio, the first film that was produced with this new radical technology, moving images, was the birth of a nation, which was the greatest anti-black piece of propaganda of the last 100 years. This was the very first move, and it set off a trajectory of anti-black policy. It was the thing that gave rebirth, actually, the second rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the South, grew by the millions right after, and it was shown in the White House. This movie, with radio being the last one.
To rave reviews.
Yes. With not radio, it was television. The first international broadcast of a television event, live television broadcast, was in the Olympics in Nazi Germany, and that was Hitler's goal, was to demonstrate Nazi Germany's superior technological prowess or whatever, and that was the very first live international broadcast was in Nazi Germany.
Interesting. I did not
So
know that.
what he talked about was recognizing not only periods that correspond astrologically with like these technological leaps forward, who are the people that control these technologies, who are the people that are in the greatest position of power to navigate which direction those technologies will be used. For the first time in human history, more people on Earth are in the know about these wicked. Hell, 40 years ago, when you and I, were like in high school, nobody knew about the majority of these conspiracy theories or this dark dealings. The internet is the Pandora's box that guarantees our ability to change the hands of power and the direction of how these new technologies can be used.
Unintended consequences for those in power.
Of course. AI, though, does represent, for the first time in human history, if we seize ownership of the technology, it represents, for the first time in human history, our ability to not have to be defined by the work that we do. We can automate the workforce and liberate the higher consciousness of human beings.
Hold on one second. Okay, I want to get into that specifically, but really quickly, I have to do this public service announcement for Black Bear News. If you enjoy the content on this channel coming to you for free every day, Monday through Friday, if you like the show, if you like hanging out here and talking to everybody, and you like what goes on here, please consider supporting the show financially. There's a bunch of links in the description box. You all know where they are: Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, blah blah blah. You know all the things. By the way, I did get a coffee, and I don't know who gave it to me. So, not that's not it. Where's my coffee? Anyways, my coffee page is not up, but someone gave me a bunch of coffees, like 5 coffees. So thank you, whoever it was that gave me the coffees. I really appreciate it. Let's see if I can find a name here. It just says someone. You know, sometimes they just tell you it's someone and not anybody's name. Anyways,
Some
okay.
of these comments are great.
Also, really quickly, Cassandra has a YouTube channel you should check out. And what is
My YouTube channel is at Daughter of the Fates, at Daughter of the Fates, Fates. Yep.
Yeah, and I'll find it and put a link in here before the show is over. Okay, so that being said,
Read some of these comments. They're great.
oh yeah, no, I haven't. Somebody said Mercury went direct yesterday.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That Mercury's been kicking our ass for a little minute.
So
it's
better. It's going to be
it was
better now. Is that what you're saying? No.
Not necessarily better. We're still.
So now it's a direct ass kicking.
Well, well, you know, I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. But the
All right.
reason everything is so much more intensified this year is because we're in America's first Pluto returns, and so it's a relatively recent phenomenon. But every nation keeps tabs on its birth chart. Every nation has a birth chart, just like every human has a birth chart. And humans don't live long enough to experience a Pluto return, but typically nations exist long enough to experience a Pluto return, which happens every 248 to 252 years. So a Pluto returns, just like your solar return, is exactly where Pluto was in your birth chart at the moment that you were born. So at the moment that the nation was born, when you come all the way back around in its revolution to the point where Pluto was in your chart. We entered America's first Pluto returns on February 20th of 2022. And that process, because of the slow movement, it takes Pluto 248 years to about 252 years to make a revolution around the sun. Because of its slow movement, we won't be out of the return process until February 19th of this year. February 19th of this year is when, Pluto and Aquarius come together officially. We're in Pluto Aquarius right now.
You're
But
talking about 2025.
no, this year, November 19th.
Oh,
2020.
November. You said February 19th.
Oh, did I? Oh, my bad. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, February 20th of 2022 is when we began.
Yeah, okay.
When it's
November-
complete, November 19th of this year, 2024,
Okay.
is when that process, Pluto returns, culminates or completes. The reason it's important and the reason every nation pays attention to it is because these mythologies around these planets articulate over thousands of years of observation. So people hear the word myth and they think false or not real. Mythology more is a storytelling method developed through years and years and years of observation. So when they talk about astronomy and astrology historically being sister sciences, you may be a scientist who loves learning about the degrees and the positions of planets in the sky. The layperson may not really care. So you create anthropomorphical stories about these scientific movements and scientific phenomena that a regular layperson can relate to through story, right? That's what myth is. It's a colorful way of still communicating a very scientific phenomenon. That's what it is. And so these Pluto returns, because of the mythology around the planet Pluto, what it represents wealth. It represents the unseen. It represents retribution, judgment, vengeance. It represents a shift, a radical shift in power, right? And so somebody mentioned earlier that Pluto came on the side of, of our solar system in 2008. Pluto entered into Capricorn 2 months after Obama was elected president, right? And so Pluto, as the great revealer, I am convinced, the Bible being a book of astrology, that's all it is. It's a book detailing a specific group of people's transition through 3 astrological ages. Through the age of Taurus, which is where Genesis begins, through the age of Aries, which is the whole Moses thing and all the energy around that, and then into the age of Pisces, right, which is the Jesus age, right, the Piscean age, and a predicting of the Aquarian age. That's what the book of Revelations is.
Okay.
It is a story that is attempting to communicate what the sun's transition from Pisces into Aquarius has the potential to look like. And the reason it's written as a horror story is because the crafters of the Bible were those who were dominating the world at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's going to be a horror story for them if they recognize that what the Aquarian age is supposed to present is liberation, revolution, and the unveiling of mysteries that have been hidden, all of that stuff.
That's a perfect segue. So that's the thing I wanted to kind of get to is that, right, we're presented with all these dystopian tales and, you know, this narrative that it's all going to end in shit. But like, and I have the same problem with, you know, I read, you know, countless articles about climate change, right? And they're like, it's really bad and we got to do something. We're really going to have to do something. And I'm like, what? Do what? Like, what is the story? Like, what's the path? What's the way forward, right? Like in the same way of like, what's the way forward for humans? Mm-hmm. That's not a collapse. That's not everything falls apart and everybody, you know, eats each other because they don't know what else to do, right? It's actually very simple, right? To, you know, like the Lorax, right? It didn't have to end with like one little tree in a gray field and, you know, smoke filled, you know, there's smoke instead of clouds. It didn't have to end that way, right? Like there could have been like, how do we stop the ridiculousness that we feel like we're on a track to live out, right? You know, there's this story and we just have to live through the story. No, we don't have to. We don't have to. We can choose something different. Like, absolutely can choose something different.
And so going back to the function of these technologies and how they impact human beings based on who is in possession, who is in control of these technologies, we see all things bad because that is what we are supposed to see. We are exposed to all things gloomy and terrifying because that is what we are supposed to see. It is the thing that always has us relinquish power to someone else. We do that out of fear. We turn over power. We turn over our ability to have a positive and radical impact because we're terrified, right? So whether it's climate change or whether it's, you know, glooming, you know, impending war or whatever. But the video that I sent you the other day about the 18 people who are changing the world. Remember that? The girl in Louisiana and, you know, and people, there are literally thousands of people on Earth daily having radical impacts on the climate, who are having primarily the climate. Most of the people that I have been following or watching these documentaries, they are saying, and these are poor people. They're like, look, it's do or die. We have to solve these problems. How do we take what we have and do something that is radically transformative? And they end up solving multiple problems in addressing the very environmental things that is challenging their health or whatever. Yep. So it ends up having kind of a ripple out effect. You know, they're cleaning up oil spills but in the process of cleaning up oil spills very efficiently, all of a sudden you have this way now that you can employ 30 people who didn't have jobs before. And all of a sudden now you're growing an economy in a local community where everybody was abjectly impoverished just a year prior by solving one problem, right? By addressing one problem. And so we can't see news like that. Right? Because if we see news like that regularly, it emboldens the rest of us. It gives the rest of us ideas.
And that's why they can't have movies about like, well, what is it, you know, what does the future look like in a way that's healthy?
That's my point.
Right.
And I'm saying, so it's easy to get caught up on doom and gloom. Right. I am saying, again, this Pandora's box called the internet.
Yeah.
I keep abreast of what's happening in the world, but I also know that even what I see, there is a whole other world of people changing the world in radical ways that we don't see. And I choose to focus on them because then I feel empowered. The question that has been imposed on us, especially in the West, is, well, what can one person do? Right? And then that gives us the ability to just say, well, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do because I'm not really going to be able to make a difference by myself anyway. So yeah, I won't recycle and I won't do this and I won't do that. But one person, these things are demonstrating to us how the will of one human being can change everything around them radically, and then that one human being has an impact on 10 others, and those have an impact on 20 others, and so on. So we can't take a defeatist attitude about how we approach the future. We cannot we cannot let fear be the dominant narrative that moves us out into the world, right? Because that's what we're going to attract, and that's what's going to come, into our cipher, is all things bad. If that's how we walk out in the world, is that there's no hope, there's no future. Then the other thing is this: as a spiritual woman, even if the future looks doomy and gloomy or whatever, and even if all the efforts that we make, are not helpful, the earth will remain, baby.
Right.
The earth will remain, even if we do not.
Right.
So that's the bottom line. The earth is not saving the earth, saving the planet.
Yeah.
She's given us an opportunity right now to save ourselves.
Exactly.
That's what she's doing.
Exactly. Well, and I often say, like, well, we were talking about this the other day. Like, nature is going to self-correct, right? It's going to correct the things that are out of balance. That's what happens, And so,
absolutely,
whether you want to believe in it or not, right? Like, overpopulation, or is not like something you believe in, right? Like it is or it isn't, right?
Exactly.
We're over fucking populated. So, I mean, we're an overshoot is a better way to put it. Like, we're sucking up all the resources. Like, just think about a major city like New York or LA. Think about the amount of resources that it takes to keep 6, 7, 8 million people alive, right? Every single day. The amount of resources that have to be shipped in, trucked in, trained in, right? Water pumped in. Like, it's astounding the amount of resources, right? And then how many major cities are there that have over 10 million people around the world? There are a lot of them. So we're like, if you just think of it on that scale, like the amount of resources it takes to keep a 10 million person city alive every single day is like, as bonkers. It's a bonkers number. So, I mean, that's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. And the other aspect, or the other aspect of that is that, even with these people, these big mega cities with all these people, you look at these places and you see the kind of wastefulness that occurs. So it's not just that you've got 10 million people living in a city. You have, again, those that are in positions of power. Opulence and waste are huge issues. So there's no incentive to create energy sources, to galvanize other energy sources, food production, or anything like that can sustain that population. So we produce all this waste, but here Sweden is, and they have less than 1% of their waste goes to landfills because they've mastered the art of transforming waste into energy so that they don't have to use oil as their primary energy. These are things that we could easily do,
right?
But there's no incentive in this country to do that. That's the thing that we have to kind of make struggle around.
Don't have profit.
Exactly.
Motives, right?
Exactly.
So,
which is why
the
going all the way back.
Things,
thank
right?
you. Going all the way back to
the
population.
Very simple. Right?
Going back to population. Right. Population is about the bottom line all the time. It is about how is somebody going to benefit off the birth of this human being. How can we? So there was a study that came out in the 70s that talked about how it was a medical study we read in college, and was about how they were using the diet to understand if there was a way to predict a prison population. So they did this study on these baby chimpanzees, right? And they determined, since out in the wild, chimpanzees' diets are typically very high in omega-3 essential fatty acids. They eat nuts and they eat the pits of seeds and so on, all these things that have lots of omega-3s. And then they put these monkeys on just a carbohydrate-rich diet and limited their access to omega-3 essential fatty acids. They were able to determine that those baby chimpanzees, after 3 months of having omega-3s taken from their diets, had a substantial cognitive decline that allowed them to predict a prison population based on the removal of omega-3 essential fatty acids and its impact on cognitive decline.
Right.
Why do they come up with studies like this if it's not to ensure that these mechanisms that they have in place that guarantee them profit are adequately able to do that, and they need the
Yeah.
bodies in order to do that.
Yep. Yep.
So.
And you know, there's the theory that they're poisoning the food in order to poison people, control them, make them dumber, or dumb them down, right? Like, and maybe that's so. Maybe that's joined and married with a profit motive.
It is.
Right? Like,
It absolutely is.
Right. So
It absolutely is.
and if that's, I mean, that's not a stretch to think that like they want people sick, stupid, infirm, unable to care for themselves.
Why?
And that's why they're trying to censor the internet. That's why they're trying to. That's why
Well,
Google's not a search engine anymore. It's a hide engine, because they're like, oh, people have too much information now, and they're doing things like empowering themselves. Oh, that's
exactly.
bad. Let's turn this off.
So you talked about the health thing. So,
Right.
the health. So from my position, right, this is what I got from being a socialist for a very long time. Was you have to look at the origin of a thing to understand that thing in its totality. It never changes, right? So if capitalism is an institution that we know was born parasitic, right? Across the board, everybody talks about like the primitive accumulation of capital, and that most primitive accumulation of capital was what? Was the slave trade, the initiation of the slave trade, and the genocide of indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere that gives rise to these superpowers now, right? If the system itself is born parasitic, then every institution that it creates is in essence parasitic. So we act confused when we can't figure out why we never quite feel well when we go to the doctor's office, why we never quite feel well when we have surgery, why we never quite can accomplish what it is we need to accomplish when we go to public school, why we just miss the boat. But what socialist ideology does teach is that there is no optimal healthcare, there is no optimal education, there is no optimal, demonstration of the execution of justice within the capitalist construct, because it needs the population to be just well enough to produce a day's labor without having enough excess time to think, to plot, to plan, to organize, to strategize. It needs you to have just enough health to perform a day's labor, or just enough money to achieve enough basic subsistent level of health without having the kind of surplus that would allow you to be socially mobile. Right. We talk about America being the land of opportunity, but in terms of the 52 developed nations, it's one of the countries that is considered the least that has the least access to social mobility, right? So these institutions, the medical industrial complex, and if you want to get deep about it, I mean, look at who gave rise to what we call the medical industrial complex. It was the Rockefeller family. Right. That was the one that created the American Medical Association and destroyed all the alternative medical schools at the turn of the century that presented competition.
And here's an interesting one. I heard that they were funders of the suffragette movement.
Oh, I heard it's fast.
Right. So you get women into the workforce, you break up the family. They also modeled the early school system, right? That we have, public school system.
Oh, I knew that.
Right, so it's like,
well, you now I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna say something controversial. You understand?
Do it.
But this whole concept of the quote, the family and the family structure, is a ruse. What we know as the nuclear family or modern marriage has its origin in the accumulation of capital. So in Europe, when we talk about the origin of the nuclear family, it wasn't just some ambiguous thing that happened. It was a way to guarantee for males, because at the same time, we have for the first time in history, like, quote, last names, lines, family lines passing through the paternal name. This was purposeful because, again, it was about the acquisition, accumulation, and the preservation of wealth through family line, through the male line, right? And so the nuclear family and, quote, the invention of romantic love, singing sonnets to your boo, writing poetry to your boo and shit, was not about love and romance. It was a way to secure your wealth. Here you have men going off to war to fight the, quote, infidels and shit, in the Crusades or whatever, and they got to a point where they were putting their women in chastity belts, locking their vaginas up and shit. All these fairy tales about women being posted up in this guarded tower where they can't get out. So if she want to get something, she got to throw her hair out the window and let her boo climb up her hair. Where do these stories come from? Yes, they sound like fairy tales, but they are based in a very real historical occurrence that was unfolding at the same time. And so women were, in order for males, particularly nobility, to secure their wealth through their male line, were doing chastity belts, closing up with women's vaginas and carrying on while they go for long periods of time to fight war and to accumulate more wealth. Well, women will find a way. You feel me? A woman in heat is going to find a way to get her needs met. So the chastity belt wasn't working no more. Brute force was not working anymore. Right. In comes all of these men who are coming in from the Middle East. They're coming in from these Arab countries where the Sufis were telling love stories all the time. And they're like, oh, well, see, even though they women are oppressed, they stay loyal. They ain't got to worry about them cheating because they win them by their heartstrings. They sing sonnets and love poems and tell them how gorgeous they are and how there's nobody else for them. Here comes this invention that we call romantic love. It becomes another way to secure your property, which is guaranteed through the woman's body in your paternal line, in your heirs. Now, y'all don't want to hear that, but I'm just telling you. So when we talk about in modern time, when you talk about women's suffrage and women going to the workforce was not the issue. Because at the same time the suffrage movement was unfolding, black women were still on plantations. So work was not the issue for enslaved people. Wait, let me finish. Because the other thing I want to say, even when people talk about the feminist movement in the 70s and how somehow that was about women going to jobs, they just wanted jobs. No. What women wanted was to be equal citizens in society, which would have guaranteed them equal access to wealth and health and preservation or whatever.
I'm a supporter of. I'm not a big there is a movement, right, of people that are like, oh, let's get back to like the nuclear family and let's, and women's rights or the feminist movement is
trad wife stuff
is a bunch of bullshit.
You're talking about trad wife stuff, right?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, I'm a fan of people doing whatever they want and families being, creating families that look like whatever you want them to look like. Like, it doesn't really matter to me, and everybody should be free to choose their family and choose their life, what their family wants. But there is a, I think there is kind of like a need for obviously a need for companionship and a need for people to have. People want to have mates and people want to have families.
That's not what
people want to be. Right.
When
they want to.
I understand what you're saying. I want that. I want a boo too.
Right.
Marriage is not something that I am opposed to. When I raise these things, again, I am talking about needing to know the origin of a phenomenon. Right, so that you can adequately historically understand how it unfolded. So when it presents itself in the now, because history is ever present, it's not something that exists way back there and doesn't have a direct impact on how we are and how we live. I am saying, even because that's what I believe. I believe in sovereignty. That's why I say I'm not a socialist anymore. It's about, I believe in individual sovereignty. I believe that nations cannot claim, even so-called race nationalists, like black nationalists and indigenous nationalists are always talking about we want national sovereignty, while in the group denying individual sovereignty. You see what I'm saying? Sure. So I'm not interested in that. What I am saying is
if it's just another control mechanism.
That's exactly right. So what I'm saying is that to understand, for example, why I talked about the chastity belts and the origin of the nuclear family. I'm not opposed to marriage and how people want to live their lives. What I am saying is that when we start talking about the economic foundation of these institutions and what it was meant to do, which was secure and privatize wealth, and wealth also being women's bodies, being able to sell and barter and broker deals based on the daughters that you have, we have to acknowledge that at least, so that we don't get trapped in this idea.
There's another theory on it too, on the idea of monogamous love, which is monogamy was invented because all the alpha males got all the women, right? Like, and that it kind of is how it works still, right? Like all the women want one guy. The few men, right, get all the women, right? And so the beta males are left out, and that's, one theory is that monogamous love was created in order to allow for the beta males.
Well,
to
I get,
hook
I
up
get
and
it.
link up and
I get it. I get it. But I would throw a wrench in that theory too. You wouldn't have a concept of beta males and alpha males or any of that shit if women had been equal members and participants of society from day one. If women had the access to be fully evolved, fully developed, fully self-securing, they could choose. They wouldn't have to rely on resources as the thing that attracts them to a male. They wouldn't have to say he has to have a car and a job and a house and all of this shit before I will even give him the time. It would be a non-issue if women had so women still make less than men in this society. No matter how much education that we have, no matter what it is we do, we're still going to make less than males in this society, because even in our Constitution, women are not considered equal citizens of the United States of America. So you can be as progressive as you think you are, but at the end of the day, we wouldn't even be having an abortion question raised every 4 years when people want to exploit our heartstrings around the issue if women were full, equal participants in the society, able to be paid the value of their labor so that they could sustain themselves as human beings, even if they chose to have kids with or without a partner. A lot of what we call love is economically motivated because of these systems of exploitation that manipulate even what we understand as love. Are you really in love? You know what I'm saying? Why does love leave if the money goes? You feel me?
Sure.
So it's still about economic exploitation and how that is used to even create narrative. You mentioned, monogamy was created, to have a more equitable distribution of the females, right? Right. But it still places females as the commodity in the society that men are bartering for, struggling for, attempting to own and possess.
To lock up.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And if in this world that we want to create, right, where everybody is equal, there is a just and equitable distribution of resources, and that intellectualism is not something that is seen as better than people who do labor with their hands. Sure. So now the intellectual doesn't become the excuse for why they make so much money, and the person that's generating all the goddamn wealth in society is living hand to mouth, right? Now you have this equitable distribution of wealth, right, based on output, based on contribution, based on how you participate in society, male, female, and all the genders in between. When you meet a boo at the bar, a potential boo at the bar, what are the first 3 questions that a person's going to ask? Right. What do you do for a living? Right. That becomes a non-issue in a world where you are paid the value of your labor. Sure. Where you are an equitable citizen in society. Now they really want to know about the essence of who you are as a human. Or
if everybody just had enough.
I'm just talking about equitable distribution. We're talking about there are 3 billionaires that their wealth, that for them to still be billionaires, they could take a percentage of their wealth and solve the problems of hunger everywhere on earth. This is money that is stolen. This is not wealth that's generated because these bastards are brilliant. This is wealth stolen. So I'm talking about people. I'm not just talking about enough. There is enough right now that we have generated, because wealth, like all other energy, does not disappear. All the wealth that we have generated and created over the last just 2,000 years, hell, we can just say just the last 200 years, belongs to those who have generated the wealth, who have taken their hands and put it on nature and transformed it into something that can be used in the society, traded as a commodity. Right? We don't benefit from that. Those who own these corporations or own this company benefits where they produce no labor. You feel me? And so I'm not interested in, quote, enough. We have the ability to live bountifully. Right. We have the ability to, and I'm not talking about opulence. I'm talking about we have the ability to live bountifully if we can get rid of corporations and CEOs and billionaires.
Absolutely. Okay.
That's the bottom line.
We got to end the show on that. Here. That's a capital idea. All right. Well, thanks guys for hanging out.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Can I say my YouTube channel
say
again?
Your piece.
Yeah.
I had it up on the screen there for a second. Here it goes. It's on the screen.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So there I am. YouTube, Daughter of the Faye, at Daughter of the Face. That's me. So yeah. That's what I do,
All right. Yeah.
among other things.
Go check out Cassandra's channel. It's very interesting. She talks about a whole bunch of things. She reads some really cool books.
Oh, yes. You should go to my
And-
audiobooks.
Yeah. Yeah. So she does that too. And thanks for hanging out, Cassandra. Appreciate
This was
you.
fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invite.
Always fun. All right, guys. Thanks so much. I'll see you again tomorrow at the new regular time of 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight. Appreciate your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. And as always, I appreciate the conversation.
Yay.
Until next time, peace.
Take care. That was fun.